Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. And there's a lot of things for us to talk about today, from Hosni Mubarak being freed in Egypt while he is awaiting trial, to sarin gas being used in Syria, to Coptic churches being burned and the Coptic community being attacked all over Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood, to rockets being fired at Israel from Lebanon. It's been a kind of crazy day. In fact, it's been a crazy few weeks, and this doesn't even include the fact that there is an ongoing peace process that is taking place largely in secret under the auspices of Secretary of State John Kerry. So the world is a very crazy place. We are dealing with a situation in Syria right now, and in Egypt for that matter, in which the world is watching disaster unfold. And we're not just talking about normal conflict. We're not just talking about normal war. In Egypt, we're talking about the systematic targeting of every Christian site and every Christian community in Egypt. Dozens of churches being destroyed, a real full-scale onslaught, a pogrom, essentially, against the Coptic Christian community. Next week on this show, by the way, we're going to have Walid Faris, who is an expert on the Arab community in the Middle East and the Christian community in the Middle East, joining us. And so we will get more information from him about the situation in the Middle East then. In Syria, we're dealing with a situation in which the government is using weapons of genocide to kill large numbers of men, women, and children. There was an attack yesterday using sarin gas. This is not a one or two people died from the use of tear gas kind of attack, and maybe it wasn't weapons, chemical weapons. This was a full-scale chemical attack, well documented with video and everything else, from Syria yesterday. The images are horrific. No one questions that. The international community now has the obligation to respond. And the question is, will it fulfill its obligation? Is the international community going to say the world is watching and simply watch? Or is the world going to say the world is watching, we've seen what you're doing, and we're going to do something about it? I noted on my Twitter account today, Rabbi Kaufman at Twitter, that it's a pretty scary thing when France is demanding that the world respond with military action and everybody else is silent. If France is the one showing courage to use military action, and no one else is, there's a significant issue going on here. There's a reluctance to use, to put in place really any kind of significant response to the situation in Syria that is frightening. And the rocket attack that came out of the north today, and Mark and I will talk about it in a little bit, the rocket attack that came from Lebanon into Israel this morning, was not from Hezbollah. It was from global jihadis, according to the Israeli Defense Forces, and probably as an attempt to say, hey, look, guys, get engaged. We need you to get engaged against Hezbollah. We need you to weaken the Syrian regime. It was probably fired not as an intention to really do significant harm, but as a way, or at least not, maybe hoping to do something, but primarily hoping to get the Israelis engaged and to stop being neutral in the face of this conflict. Things are really bad in the world, and Mark and I will simply go place by place by place and issue by issue when we get back from the break. I would like to thank, as I always do, Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa for their support of this show and enabling us to do what we do. We'll be back in just a moment with Understanding the World.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Yes, now your favorite programs on Webcast One Live can all be watched and listened to on any Android or Apple device. Your phone, tablet, or iPad. Yes, your favorite shows on Webcast One Live are available live or on podcast wherever you go. Let me introduce to you some of our great shows.
My name is Justin Bennett with Strong Tower Consulting, where we passionately coach individuals, families, and businesses to make better financial decisions that help create success and eliminate financial stress. I offer a free 30-minute consultation where we find out where your situation is. I explain how I do my coaching services. Then it's up to you whether you want to continue. The Bible has, depending on who you believe, 800 to 2,000 scriptures that talk about money alone. So it's a pretty important subject in God's eyes. That's one of the things that I enjoy doing, is help them see God's ways of handling money. You know, it's interesting. Most people that I ask, what would it be like to be debt-free? The common response is, I don't know. I don't think it's possible. But in 90 days, most of my clients go from, I don't think it's possible, to, I'm excited. In 2 years or less, I will be debt-free. There's no tricks, no gimmicks, nothing being sold here. It's just learning how to do money well. This is Strong Tower Financial Hour, where we help people go from being broke and scared to having hope with a plan.
I'm Michael Libby. I'm the host of Insight on Business, the News Hour. We're seen live at 8:45 each Monday morning at Webcast One Live, or whenever you want on my blog or on the internet. So what qualifies me to talk about advertising, marketing, and consumer trends? Well, it's my business. Insight Advertising, Marketing, and Communications has helped dozens of companies, small, medium, and large, learn how to use advertising correctly, and we pass that information on to you each and every week.
So when you want to watch your favorite Webcast One program, remember, there's an app for that. You know, there's an app for that.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein. And Mark, we were just looking at the news reports coming out of Israel about the rocket attack this morning and just trying to figure out exactly what happened has been difficult because the news reports that have been coming out all day have been conflicting. So
yeah, we seem to know that Iron Dome did intercept at least one of the rockets. Now, how many rockets were fired, we're not particularly sure. If there were 4, and if one reportedly landed in the Mediterranean, then there are 2 others to account for.
Yeah, earlier there was a report that from the IDF that one of the rockets was shot down and the other 3 didn't even land in Israeli territory. I was looking at this stuff, and then I just saw a news report on Times of Israel that says the rocket, one of 2 that landed in residential areas, fell a short distance from a facility with dozens of elderly Holocaust survivors in Akko, which is clearly in Israeli territory. So I'm a little confused by the way that this has been covered. It's, you know, we at least lately have been able to follow the news on Twitter and by email, and people are reporting things. And I can understand that the Israelis might not want to say, you know, the rocket fell at this GPS location, or if you know where this house is, that's where it fell. But to at least say, oh, the rockets actually fell in Israel, and Israel was really under attack today, is a little different than kind of totally ignoring the fact and pretending that nothing really happened, which seems to be more of what happened.
The point was made by some people we talked to in Israel this morning that this is really the first attack since the 2006 war with Hezbollah, and that many people have moved into the region since then, and this is really their first taste of what the region suffers.
Yeah, well, and we also have the issue with that this attack no one is saying that this attack came from Hezbollah.
No, there's nobody saying that. The question is if it's international jihadis. The international jihadis then are in opposition to Hezbollah because Hezbollah is a client of Syria. And so there's some internecine fighting going on. Now, David, what's your theory as to why?
Well, if these really were global jihadis and not Hezbollah, there are a couple possibilities. One possibility is that these guys decided to take advantage of the fact that Hezbollah is fighting out of Syria and to come in and attack Israel randomly using relatively weak weaponry, which that's one possibility.
Well, but that possibility is linked to the hope that Israel would retaliate.
Maybe. Or these guys just said, why don't we attack Israel? We don't like Israel. I mean, it's possible that these were just nutcases who want to attack Israel. Oh. I think the more likely intent was to try to get Israel to retaliate against Hezbollah.
Yes, and to me that means trying to divert the world's attention from what's happening in Syria. You may not agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, so the point that Mark is arguing here, and I just want to point this out, is that the Syrian government has regularly tried to deflect attention away from what's going on in Syria to try to get the world to pay attention to anything else. And by the way, guess what's not in the news today? Anything having to do with Iran, which is Syria's benefactor. So Iran has succeeded in deflecting the world's attention away from its nuclear program by simply backing Syria and letting Syria do what it's doing, because no one is paying attention to Iran right now, who is actively having its centrifuges spinning and creating its nuclear program in a much more advanced level. But the issue about deflecting attention away, by attacking Israel, I think they'd have to do that at a vastly larger level to deflect attention away from the use of sarin gas and killing hundreds of people. I mean, just knowing what's been going on in the Twitterverse and going on, in the news media. But on the other hand, if they were actually able to hit Israeli targets from Lebanon and do some real damage, they might get the Israelis to do something against Lebanon. And right now, Hezbollah has a significant percentage of its resources and its attention in Syria. So it's possible that the Islamic fighters, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda-backed organizations and others in Syria who are fighting against Hezbollah fighters in Syria would like to get Hezbollah to pull back some of those fighters and operate in Lebanon instead of operating in Syria. And so my thought on what this was today is exactly that these rebel groups grabbed some relatively outdated or even significantly outdated rocketry, launched them from southern Lebanon into Israel in the hopes that the Israelis would then retaliate against Hezbollah and force Hezbollah to pull back forces to counteract what's going on in Israel, maybe even to use some of the Israeli rockets.
The other day, however, some either rockets or mortars were fired at the Golan Heights. And Israel took the opportunity to basically lob some stuff back into Syria.
Well, in that, another thing that's going on, and this is important, the Israelis have been showing a lot of restraint, because one of the things that's going on is that the Syrian regime and Hezbollah and these rebel groups are launching weapons against each other. And in the Golan Heights, there have been instances where weapons being launched at the rebel groups are falling into the Golan Heights. That's not really an attack on Israel. At least it's not an intentional attack on Israel. Not that Israel's happy about it, and Israel has retaliated. But Israel is not seeing those missed attacks within Syria as attacks on Israel itself. Whereas today it was clearly an attack on Israel itself. The only question is, what was the intent of the attack on Israel today? And the last thing Israel wants to do is engage against Hezbollah and have hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets coming from Hezbollah attacking cities all around Israel. Michael Oren pointed out in a presentation that I went to recently that a few years ago, Hezbollah had 20,000 rockets, the longest of which could reach Hadera, which is north of Tel Aviv. Now, Hezbollah has rockets that can reach a lot. In the far southernmost city in Israel, they have rockets that can hit anywhere in Israel, and much more powerful and much more accurate rockets. So a conflict with Hezbollah today is not going to be Katyushas like we saw fired out of Lebanon that were easily stopped by Iron Dome and just fell harmlessly, or more or less harmless. There's some property damage here and there, but would be much worse than that. And so Israel really is very reluctant to engage if they don't have to, because the amount of damage that would be done in a real altercation with Hezbollah would be massive.
We also know that Western Galilee Hospital has apparently not activated some of its procedures in preparation for an extended battle there.
And well, tell us a little bit about what Western Galilee Hospital is and what it does.
Well, it's interesting. Western Galilee Hospital is the northernmost hospital in Israel. It's a regional hospital. Recently, apparently, Syrian wounded fighters have been smuggled across the border to be treated as patients in the hospital, and then have been smuggled back into Syria for that. But it's a hospital that is aware of the necessity to protect against biochemical attacks and otherwise, and has a complete hospital below ground so that in an emergency, that its patients can be shuttled quickly below ground and taken care of to begin with.
And speaking of chemical weapons, another reason that rockets falling in the northern part of Israel today certainly raised the alert level even higher than they normally would have is because of the sarin gas use by the Syrian regime against its own people. And if we've got that being used against Syrian people, then
they'll certainly
there's
use
the potential to use it against Israel for sure.
The whole paradigm works that way. If indeed certain forces in the Middle East are willing to murder their own people, and what's the number these days of the deaths in Syria? What's your latest count? About 100,000?
It's something like that total.
Well, if that's what's going to be done to their own people, imagine what would be done to Israelis if Israelis were in that position of being attacked.
And so Benjamin Netanyahu today said that the alleged use of chemical weapons against Syrian civilians Wednesday proves yet again that we cannot permit the world's most dangerous regimes to acquire the world's most dangerous weapons. That is not a very veiled reference about Iran's nuclear program, by the way. That you've got an Iranian proxy using sarin gas against its own people. This is, certainly good evidence that killing hundreds or thousands of people potentially. The as many as 1,300 people died in the sarin attack, according to the Times of Israel article that I was just looking at here. That if Iran gets these nuclear weapons, you could potentially see these things being used. And the other potential is you could have Iran using a nuclear cover to cover the use of chemical and biological weapons by Hezbollah or Syria potentially. And these are big problems. Israel is not under any false premises that these are not going to be used against it.
Well, back it up one step. The first thing is this doesn't seem to be the first time that chemical weapons were alleged to have been used. Now,
I think there are 11 times.
Something like that, but certainly this is the largest incident that has been reported. But each time something like that is used, it really has challenged the American policy of not allowing these chemicals to be used, and that once the red line is crossed, then the United States would ostensibly do something.
You're saying we have a red line?
Well, somebody says we have.
At least
somebody said
something approximating a red line.
Yes, but not only the United States has fallen short on this particular issue, obviously the United Nations has as well.
Look, there was a parody piece in The Onion a few weeks ago that was looking at Syria, and the parody piece basically said that the Middle East is breaking out in Syria. The Middle East meaning there's all kinds of fighting, there's civil war going on, people are being killed, and that they were worried that Africa would break out. Well, what is Africa? Africa, in this analogy, is the mass murder of large numbers of people.
Right.
And unfortunately, as the analogy pointed out, once you hit Africa, no one pays any attention.
Right.
They feel like it's beyond them. And there's something called the bystander effect, which essentially is that everybody sits and waits for somebody else to do something. They expect that somebody will step in. Well, we know for a fact that no one's going to step in if we wait, because the UN Security Council is definitely not going to do anything because China and Russia have vetoed it.
They've tied that issue up there.
So who's going to step in here? I mean, we cannot be in a situation in which we've got the Egyptian Coptic community being completely destroyed because the Egyptian military won't care and do anything about it. We can't be in a situation in which the Syrian government is killing hundreds of people using chemical weapons without any response whatsoever from the international community, or worse, with support from the international community coming from Iran, Russia, and China in the form of opposing UN Security Council resolution. They even opposed a strongly worded condemnation. I mean, we're not even talking about military action against Syria. We're talking about a strongly worded condemnation. You cannot condemn the use of sarin gas by an ally? I mean, that's ridiculous. What kind of morality are we dealing with here? Oh, by the way, the Russians decided that they would not arrest gay athletes who were participating in the military, in the Olympics.
Very nice, very nice. But look at the scorecard. Over the past week or so, certainly there have been 800 or so deaths. In Egypt, there have been now reports of up to 1,300 deaths. In Syria, there have been deaths reported in Lebanon and in Iraq. And so the action of the Security Council or the UN in general has been nothing.
Well, look, here's a statement that I think is important for people to understand. Okay, so this is a statement made by Nachman Shai, who's a Labor Party member of the Knesset. Okay, so we're talking about left of center here in Israel. Nachman Shai said, in a place where babies and children are massacred with gas, the state of Israel must make its position known. Okay, this is not something that divides Israelis about whether or not, the right wing wanting to use military force and the left wing not. No. When you see this is something that brings everybody together. This is intolerable for anybody across the political spectrum. And when you see governments that are saying we care and they're not doing anything, they don't care. That's the reality. Any government that says it cares and does nothing doesn't care.
Well, what about the pretense that if you depose Assad, the rebels will be equally, if not worse?
Then you have to go in and you have to make sure that that's not the case. Right? You cannot say that the solution to the Syrian conflict is to nuke them all and let God sort them out, or to gas them all and let God sort them out. That's just not okay. No. I mean, the solution has to be at this point in time that you have to consider stopping the regime from using those weapons, which means going in and getting control of those weapons.
Well, does that mean troops?
Well, it would have to mean troops to a certain extent. There's no other way you can do it. And if the world community is deciding who's going to swerve at the last minute in the chicken here, you're going to end up with not hundreds of people dead. You're going to end up with tens of thousands of people dead. That's going to be what's going to happen because the the Syrian regime, in order to stay in power, is going to continue to up the ante here until somebody responds.
Well, they've tested the water so far, and the response has been negligible to begin with.
So we now know that the Western powers are not going to respond if tens of people die. And we saw yesterday the Western powers are still going to sit there and watch if hundreds of people die. So the next thing you're going to see is thousands of people dying. I mean, that's going to be what's going to happen because the Syrian government certainly has the ability to do that, and right now they don't have anything to lose because they're facing an opposition that they don't value at all as far as their lives.
And the method of delivery for this gas is purportedly ballistic missiles.
Well, if that. I mean, it sounds to me like the other day they just took these canisters up in helicopters and dropped them straight down on the location that they wanted to drop them. And if that's the case, they can be extremely precise. They can just measure the wind and go, take this gas and wipe out blocks, rather than even larger areas. They can wipe out localized populations and be precise in who they're killing. These are genocidal tactics. These are not normal tactics of war. You only use these weapons when you want to wipe out men, women, and children together. That's what these weapons are used for. They're not about attacking soldiers. These are anti-civilian population weapons that we're talking about. And when you're in Egypt and you're attacking entire Christian communities and churches, you're not talking about going after soldiers. That's not the Muslim Brotherhood attacking the military forces. They're using it as an excuse to target people who they hate and want to get rid of. I mean, we're dealing with two different conflicts here, in which we've got groups who simply don't value the lives of the people they're fighting against. That's the reality. The tactics that are being used here are not tactics to try to win a conflict. They're tactics to try to eliminate the existence of the opposition. Those are genocidal tactics.
The scorecard there in Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, something like 40 of the churches have been...
I think it depends on the reports, because I've seen ones that are
more than
40.
Than that. I see.
And
that
dozens.
That calls to mind Kristallnacht.
And there was an article that said that was called Egypt's Kristallnacht that I saw the other day. You're having churches, businesses, and communities attacked because they are Christian there. So the world has to respond to this stuff. Now, that it's difficult to figure out how to respond, I have no question whatsoever. That we shouldn't have been prepared to respond, that I have a real big problem with. We definitely needed to already have had a response ready to go to this stuff. This stuff has been in the works for a long period of time.
Now, what about the population of Americans who are isolationist?
Well,
and where is that coming from?
We are a war-weary country. We don't want to send troops in anywhere. But if we're now in a situation in which, because there's no threat of us sending troops in,
there's no stick.
Not only can these governments act against their own populations literally any way they want,
yes,
but we're finding ourselves unable to influence policy. And I'll tell you, look. One of the best quotes I've heard recently was from Leon Wieseltier. And Leon Wieseltier said, it's okay for me to be a bystander. It's okay for me to say I'm watching and figuring out what's going on, and to try to figure out what I think is best for people to do and to talk about it. It's not okay for the President of the United States and for the UN Security Council to do that. They cannot be bystanders. There has to be a policy. There is no situation that occurs in the world that there is not a more beneficial solution and a less beneficial solution as far as the United States goes.
As far as the UN is concerned, there are other dynamics there that we know contribute to apathy or blockage of action. And that we know that is countries like China and Russia have their own interests, and they vote their interests where they are in the Security Council.
Well, and this becomes a problem when we can support a bystander position by simply saying we're going to wait for the Security Council to take action.
And it won't take action.
Because it's never going to take action. So if any time we say, oh, we'd like to get the world united behind this, or we'll bring it up in the UN Security Council, or we'll advocate for something in the UN Security Council, we might as well have said go on killing. I mean, that's the reality with it. Because the best we're going to do is eventually maybe get sanctions in place. We're not talking about anything that's going to come anytime soon. And I can even tell you the sanctions aren't going to happen because the same countries that are going to prevent military action are going to prevent sanctions from being put in place. So you can guarantee that anything that we send to the UN Security Council is not going to have an effect of stopping whatever we brought to their attention to begin with. It's simply not going to happen.
There was an article online about a tweet issued by Samantha Power, who is the United Nations ambassador to the United Nations, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And people interpreting it seem to say that Power was, in essence, criticizing Obama. The tweet had to do with Power is saying it's unconscionable to do nothing and people should not do nothing. But knowing full well that this would not affect the outcome of the United Nations to begin with, and therefore some people interpret it as criticism of inaction.
Well, I can tell you just yesterday,
Obama.
Samantha Power tweeted, reports devastating, hundreds dead in streets, including kids killed by chem weapons. UN must get there fast. If true, perpetrators must face justice.
How do you interpret that? Because I'm suggesting that that's a backhand criticism of the Obama administration.
Well, what I think is that she believes that the UN needs to act, and the problem is I think a lot of people believe the UN needs to act, but the UN is not going to act. I mean, we can be idealistic all we want about what the potential of the UN is.
So if the UN doesn't act, who does it fall upon?
Well, I think it falls. Look,
and here's the link. The link is if the UN is not going to act, and the UN ambassador says you must act, and our country itself does not act, that's a criticism of our foreign policy.
That I agree with, and I think at some point NATO needs to act. I don't think that NATO can abdicate the responsibility to advocate for its own positions to the United Nations.
No.
If we believe that things need to happen in Syria and need to be happening in Egypt, we need to do something about it. We cannot simply wait for anybody else. And we cannot say it's okay whatever happens because we don't care, because we do care.
Well, who has leverage within NATO? Because Turkey is a member of NATO. What does Turkey want? Yeah?
Let's talk about that, exactly that, after our commercial break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershide.
I'm administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. And Mark, we're talking Turkey here. What Turkey's role in both the Egypt conflict and the Syria conflict, and it's kind of a mess in both of them.
Well, apparently there have been protests against the government of Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan, but they have not succeeded in toppling him. Now, Erdogan continues to make absurd remarks, the latest of which is...
Well, I mean, let's talk about the fact that there are more journalists arrested in Turkey right now than there are in any other country in the world.
Right.
I mean, Erdogan is trying to put in place a much more restrictive kind of government at the same time that he is theoretically preaching democracy. And his version of democracy is after the elections, anything goes. His statement the other day basically was, the Muslim Brotherhood was democratically elected. Who cares whatever else they're doing? The democracy is not about liberty. Democracy is about popular vote. So his conception of democracy is mob rule.
And in addition,
he's putting that in place in Turkey. That's exactly what he's doing. So the minority rights in Turkey are no longer safe. Right. They're under threat. One of the things you got to understand about this conflict, especially in relation to Turkey, is that Turkey supports Morsi in Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And Turkey's been very angry about the fact that the West has not come to the defense of Morsi in Egypt. But if you think about that compared to the Syrian conflict, then Turkey is supporting the Muslim Brotherhood-led rebel groups, not just the Free Syrian Army, but the Muslim Brotherhood-led rebel groups against the government. So he's finding himself in a very bad situation in both of those conflicts. In fact, Turkey's side in both of those conflicts is currently losing. And the United States has failed to step up in either conflict.
The criticism being aimed within his own country apparently is coming from supporters of the Turkish preacher Fethullah Gulen, G-U-L-E-N. So there is internal criticism being leveled. And
Erdogan has done a very significant amount of harm, I think, to the reputation of Turkey around the region. Other people would say less so, he's put himself in a situation in which his relationships with the dictatorial regimes are much worse, but his relationships with the majority Muslim Brotherhood backing populations in some of these countries has actually improved. So he's the champion of the Muslim Brotherhood. But without Egypt as an anchor for the Muslim Brotherhood, that makes life a lot more difficult for what Erdogan wants to do with Turkey and kind of reestablishing a Muslim religious dominance in the region.
First of all, interpreters of Turkey that we've heard on local campuses will not admit that there's a strong shift to the right within Turkey to begin with.
Well, yes, because they want to portray Turkey as being a paragon of democracy.
Muslim country.
Well, and it's more moderate than some of the others, but that's not saying much. Well, I mean, the problem is, from the United States perspective, from our perspective, as advocates for real democracy, we don't believe in one man, one vote, one time. We don't believe in mob rule as democracy. What we want is a constitutional democracy, or something that protects minority rights. We want governments that will protect the rights of women and protect the rights of minorities. And what Erdogan is advocating for will not do that. And if you have Turkish democracy, the way that Erdogan's practicing democracy, take place around the world, it will be a tremendous blow to women's rights in a lot of places. Yes, it will temporarily advance them, but the problem, I mean, when you're dealing with these Sharia-based Muslim dictatorships, but in the long run, you're going to entrench a position that is worse. And so we really need to get Turkey to back off its radical position and move to something that's a little less radical. They don't have to come into agreement with the United States or Israel on these issues, but you can't have Turkey backing the Muslim Brotherhood and the Muslim Brotherhood's plan of oppressing minorities in Egypt and saying that this is okay. Because that undermines everything else. The whole idea of what the United States is advocating for in the region cannot be that. And so we've essentially lost our ability to push Turkey as the leader.
Well, let's look at the issue then of whether the United States should continue to supply financial support to Egypt. Some people have said that the real issue that's being overlooked by many people is that the situation is a zero-sum game. It's either the army, the military in Egypt, or it's the Muslim Brotherhood. Is the United States not perceiving that as the situation?
Well, I think part of this may have to do with Turkey. Turkey is considered one of our biggest allies. We've been trying to advance advance Turkey's position in the region. And by allowing Turkey to work with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, we were trying to do that. So Turkey has been demanding that the U.S. withdraw support from the military and push for Morsi's reinstatement. Meanwhile, the Egyptian people, not just the military, the Egyptian people seem to be overwhelmingly opposed to Morsi, that Morsi proved to be ineffective and incapable of governing, as the Muslim Brotherhood proved ineffective and incapable of governing. And the Egyptian military right now is very much allied with us strategically. So we're in a very bizarre position here. First of all, Israel and Egypt have a peace treaty that says that the treaty is in force as long as the United States continues to maintain financial support. So there are immediate consequences if we would withdraw aid. But the biggest consequence is, do you really think they're going to give up power and put themselves in a position to be slaughtered by the Muslim Brotherhood the second they do? Of course not. I mean, what we would be doing is taking away their ability to finance the defense of the military and of the majority of the population, and allowing it to turn into a failed state with many more people being killed. This would not change the situation.
Yet the pressure is being placed by various individuals and groups to remove American funding.
Well, part of this is because we have laws that we've had red lines. The fact that we can't call what happened in Egypt a coup, because if we do, we're forced to stop financial aid to Egypt, is an absurdity. I mean, you can't support we're in a situation in which the coup is definitely beneficial to our foreign policy. There's no doubt about it. In fact, as I've said before, this is a situation that is so bizarre that we're cheering on a military coup because it increased the freedom of the people of Egypt. The elected government was so oppressive that we shouldn't have been supporting them. So the real question is, why were we giving money to a terrorist-led government and now talking about withdrawing money from a non-terrorist-led government? The Muslim Brotherhood is a supporter of Hamas, and they're supporters of terrorism all around the region. So we're saying it's okay to give them money, but it's not okay to give the people who ousted them from power money simply because it's a coup, technically?
Well,
this is a problem.
The rationale for providing the Brotherhood money was the fact is we were probably contractually obligated to do so, and the fact that in some eyes the election of the Muslim Brotherhood justified it as legitimate power.
Look, you could also make the argument that if we withdraw the aid to Egypt, we have no influence over that government at all. The Saudis and others have already said that they'd make it up because...
and there goes the leverage.
There goes the leverage completely. And at that point, we could be looking at the same situation we're in Syria, where we have no say on either side, no, Syria we should have gotten involved in much earlier, because at this point there really is no good solution for us in Syria. We're dealing with catastrophically bad or horrifically even worse. And, so when we're dealing with, we would need to send in troops to, stop chemical weapons from getting into the wrong hands. Absolutely. Guess what? They're in the wrong hands now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we already said if Syria is going to use those weapons against its own citizens, how much more likely would they be to use them against Israelis, Europeans, or Americans? I mean, they're not stable in the hands of the people they're in now. So we're looking at a situation there where we just can't say, oh, it's okay for them to continue doing what they're doing.
So, David, what would you propose the United States do, number one, in terms of Syria?
Well, first of all, when we said we had a red line in Syria with the use of chemical weapons, we should have had plans in place that we're ready to execute right now. This should not be what do we do? It should be, we're going to execute plan A. I mean, that's where we should be, to be honest. What plan A is, I don't know. I don't know what resources we have in place. I don't militarily, diplomatically, strategically on the ground. I'm not going to pretend that I do.
Right.
And I'm not going to argue that there would not be significant consequences of doing that. But the solution cannot be, let's continue to talk about it until thousands of people are dead instead of hundreds of people, or tens of thousands of people are dead instead of thousands of people. And this is Samantha Power's point. Once you use weapons of genocide, and that's what sarin gas is. When you're talking about gassing entire neighborhoods of people, regardless of their age, regardless of whether they're involved in the military, you're talking about genocidal weapons. And at some point, you've got to have a policy in place that you're going to put into action, not just talk about. And the consequences of that may well be you send troops in. It may well be that you bomb the chemical weapon sites and make sure that those weapons are inaccessible, which is probably the more likely thing to do. That you put in a no-fly zone that you're going to enforce, which is also an easier thing to do. I mean, troops don't have to be the top option. The troops may be down the list of options, but there's got to be an option. There's got to be a plan A, and plan A has got to already be, ready to go. You don't say we have a red line in dealing with Syria, and then a year later, let's continue to talk about thinking what we're going to do. I mean, this is not commenced to begin to figure out what we're going to do. This has got to be, it's time to go. Boom.
Well, knowing the way that operations work, do you seriously consider that the U.S. doesn't have Operation A?
Well, I think the U.S. has operations A through Z. The question is when we're going to actually put them into place.
Okay,
I mean,
but
I can't imagine that we don't have those plans ready to go.
You're right. You can't imagine I can't imagine that there are no strategies on the table that people are looking at.
I mean, what I think is going on here, Mark, is the bystander effect. I really do. I think that's the issue. The United States could do something. I think NATO could do something. I think any of the European countries could do something. I think the United States Security Council could do something. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to do it. Russia and China don't like seeing civilians killed in Syria, but they don't want to step in and stop Assad's government. Europe doesn't want to send troops in, and they don't have the ability to do the air cover that the United States could do, so they're not going to do it. They're waiting for the United States to act.
Or is somebody waiting for Israel to act?
Well, Israel's definitely not going to act.
Well, do you think the United States is gradually telling Israel, we can't do it ourselves for various reasons. Why don't you go in and solve the problem?
I think it's more likely the case that the United States is holding off and NATO's holding off because they're afraid of massive amounts of attacks coming against European targets and Israel. I mean, let's say you went in, let's say the United States went in. The attacks would come against Israel.
Of course it would.
Okay. Now, if the United States doesn't go in with a significant amount of force, you're going to see chemical and biological weapons being used against Israel in addition to thousands of Hezbollah rockets. So the consequences are massive. We're not talking about little consequences here. The Israelis have to be prepared not only to defend against that and to deal with it once it happens, but the United States has to be prepared to go in with enough force to stop it quickly. And I don't think we're ready to commit that.
Are you saying there's no proxy that America can use to do this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, it's possible that Israel would have the ability to take out weapons sites in large numbers.
Yeah.
I think that is possible. What the consequences of that would be probably are large-scale attacks coming from Hezbollah. The United States at some point, if it went in, would need to engage with significant enough force to prevent a lot of these other things. And I don't know that the United States wants to commit that.
Transition to a different topic is what amount of leverage the United States is wishing to use in return for peace process guarantees.
Leverage on who?
Leverage on, leverage for what candy is the United States willing to give to either the Palestinians or Israel in order for the talks to have taken place now to begin with?
I saw a statement by a boss today that said basically if the peace talks don't succeed, it's going to be a disaster. Okay, now, how accurate that is, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that if the United States is telling them the truth, I could see that, because the United States could well say, nothing's ever going to get passed in the United Nations.
Right.
You're not going to get what you want through the United Nations. If you go to the International Court, you might not get what you're going to get there. We've talked to Eugene Kantorovich, who will point out that according to the League of Nations mandate, Israel has the right to all the land, and the Palestinians don't have a right to any of it. Now, Israel would definitely have to treat the population differently under those circumstances, but there wouldn't be a Palestinian state. So the Palestinians really don't want to press that necessarily. And if you're in a situation in which they could talk about removing aid if there's no concessions. They could talk about simply recognizing borders determined by Israel at a future, unilaterally recognizing borders if the process. I mean, there's a lot of leverage there.
Right.
The big problem in the negotiations, and I've written about this and we've talked about it multiple times, that the Palestinians really have nothing to offer. They're in a situation in which the best concession they can offer is not to cause instability. And the problem with it is the instability causes them harm too. It's not just causing the Israelis harm. There's a lot of advancement that's taken place in the Palestinian economy over the last multiple years, especially in the West Bank, that would be put in significant jeopardy if there's another intifada.
Let me rephrase my question. What quid pro quo has been offered with Israel?
Look, we don't know.
We don't know.
Okay, we don't know. It could be that the United States offered them weaponry that they could use against Iran. It could be that they offered them that they threatened to withdraw it. Certain support for different things. It could be that the United States said, look, we'll try to run interference with Europe. We'll make this a quiet, secret process for the next 9 months with only Secretary Kerry speaking publicly about what's actually going on. And we'll work with Europe to end the isolation of Israel within Europe. Now, people talk about Israel being more isolated than it's ever been. That's actually not true. Israel's relationship with its Arab neighbors at least some of the Arab neighbors, is now as good as it's ever been. If you talk to the diplomatic corps, the perception that Israel is facing this massive amount of isolation is simply not accurate. They have a lot of problems with certain European leadership, but their strategic situation with their neighbors is actually better than it's been in a long time, with the exception of what's going on in Syria and what's going on in Iran.
Do you think? How do you think Netanyahu is faring in this situation?
I think that Netanyahu is trying to stay out of the negotiations as much as possible. I think his goal is going to be to blame whatever concessions are made either on the United States or on the forced hands of Europe forcing their hands, the UN forcing their hands. I mean, I think that's just the way his coalition is set up. But I do think that he realizes that the two-state solution is essential, and the Israelis are going to try to actually put forward a two-state solution that benefits Israel. They don't want to control the vast majority of the Palestinian population. Why do they want to do that? If there's really no hope for them ever annexing this territory, and the only possibility, if they did, would be to have a large hostile population that they have to basically pay for the care of, in addition to securing indefinitely going forward. That's not a good situation, even for the Likud. The Likud doesn't want that situation. The Likud is going to try to put forward a two-state solution that is going to provide Israel security. They're going to concede less than Labor would, but they're not going to argue for Israel maintaining every inch of the land. That's simply not what the Likud policy is. It's not what Netanyahu is going to want. And if Israel succeeds in convincing the United States and then Europe that that's what they're arguing for, the Palestinians will have lost every bargaining chip they have, because their only real bargaining chip is to demonize Netanyahu and pretend that Israel doesn't want a two-state solution.
Well, essentially, that's what Haaretz does.
That's what they've been doing. Yeah, but there's no. If the United States were to come out and argue that Israel is actually doing that Israel is actually supporting a two-state solution, and that it's the Palestinians' intransigence over borders and security in Jerusalem and these things that are causing the problem, everything collapses. At that point in time, the Palestinians could literally lose every single thing that they've built up and have absolutely no way. Then you could deal with a unilateral solution. The United States could just say, here's the only thing that's going to work. We're going to support and recognize Israel's control over this territory. At that point, the UN Security Council is irrelevant, and the situation is still a two-state solution. It's just not the two-state solution that the Palestinians want.
Well, that's not going to happen, essentially because that's not where Kerry's going to be. Well, Kerry's made it quite specific that if the talks fail, he's already put it on the table. It would be Israel's fault.
Well, I don't know I don't know that that's the case, because if they,
you don't think he said that?
Well,
he apparently said that to a group of Jewish organizations. He intimated that if this fails, it's your fault.
Well, look, I think there's a perspective. I think Europe would automatically believe that, because Europe believes that Israel should pull out of everything it gained in 1967. I mean, so if you're coming at it from that perspective, Israel's going to say, who cares?
Well, Israel will say, who cares? But with the United States...
well, yeah, but look, all you got to do is have a different administration in this country come in and recognize Israel's control over that territory. It doesn't matter. The big problem that we've had over the last few years with our foreign policy is that when the President Obama came into office, he radically changed America's foreign policy in relation to the Muslim world and in relation to Israel and the peace process. Yeah. But that means that if a conservative Republican comes into office, a conservative Republican could do the same thing. And if you get somebody who comes into office who believes that Israel is 100% in the right and simply decides to recognize unilaterally Israel's control over all that stuff, it's a done deal.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to happen necessarily.
Well, it may not happen because it's not in anybody's benefit to happen. But just as likely as somebody saying that Israel is completely in the wrong.
Well, we won't know for sure until 9 months later, and
so
there's a window. The opportunity is 9 months, a gestational period.
So next week on Understanding the World, we will be joined by Walid Fares, and we will certainly be talking much more about Egypt and Syria. These things are not going to go away this week. This has been Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. Thank you for joining us.